My name is Olivia. In the morning, everything shattered started just like any other. The sun was just beginning to warm the kitchen tiles, casting soft light across the counter where I stood, quietly making breakfast. Scrambled eggs, toast, coffee. Same as always. There was a comfort in the routine, the way my hands knew exactly what to do without needing to think. I think I needed that comfort more than I realized. Frank came downstairs, still looking like the man I fell in love with decades ago. He was fit, confident, polished. "Smells good," he said, reaching for his mug. I smiled like I always did, but something in his tone felt distant, like he was already somewhere else in his mind. "You're off early today," I said, setting the plate in front of him. "Meeting about the downtown redevelopment project," he replied, barely looking up from the paper. I nodded. No kiss on the cheek, no gentle touch on the arm like he used to. Just coffee and newsprint between us. I asked if Jason was still sleeping. Frank just nodded, not even lifting his head. "Studying late, I think," I added, more to myself than to him. Jason, our only son. He's 19 now, off at college, studying accounting. He's always been more like me, quiet, observant, careful with his words. Lately, when he comes home, there's this hesitation in him, like he wants to say something but can't find the courage. And when he looks at his father, it's not the same admiration I used to see in his eyes. It's something else. Worry, maybe. Or doubt. I watched Frank grab his briefcase and head to the door. He turned just enough to say, "Don't wait up," and then he was gone. The house fell quiet. Too quiet. I sat at the kitchen table just staring at the sunlight moving across the floor. 3 weeks had passed since my mother, Martha, died, and somehow it still didn't feel real. She'd been strong, sharp-witted, even in her final days. A woman who carried so much in silence. I hadn't finished going through her things yet. It felt too soon. But that morning I found myself pulling out the cardboard box we'd brought home from her room. It was full of old papers, photographs, memories I wasn't quite ready to touch. Still, I reached for a leather-bound book at the bottom. A journal. "Martha's Records," it said, in her unmistakable handwriting. I flipped through the pages idly at first. Budget notes, small reflections. And then, on the very last page, written in a shaky, uneven script, were words that stopped my breath. I'm wrestling with whether I should tell Olivia directly. I've harbored doubts about Frank for a long time. But I have no proof. I don't want to destroy my daughter's happy home. However, if my intuition is correct, that was it. The sentence just ended. I closed the journal slowly, my hands trembling just enough to notice. My mother had doubts about my husband. Doubts strong enough to write down. And she didn't tell me. Not because she didn't trust me, but because she didn't want to hurt me. I stared at the leather cover, her words echoing in my mind. Had she seen something I hadn't? Or maybe refused to see? The sound of Jason's footsteps upstairs broke the silence. He came into the kitchen, tall and a little sleepy, with that same quiet presence he's always had. "Morning, Mom," he said, grabbing some orange juice. "Did you sleep okay?" I asked, trying to sound normal. "Sort of. Studying's killing me," he chuckled. But even that felt forced. He asked if Dad had already left, and when I said, "Yes," he just nodded. Silence lingered between us. Then, at the exact same moment, we both started to speak. It made us laugh. That awkward kind of laugh that comes when you're both thinking about heavier things. "I wanted to ask," he said, hesitating a bit. "Would it be okay if I came home this weekend? The camping trip I planned got canceled." Of course," I answered quickly, maybe a little too eagerly. "I'd love to have you here." He looked relieved, then added, "There's something I want to talk to you about." I asked what it was, but he just smiled slightly and said, "I'll tell you when I'm home." And then he was gone, running late for class, rushing out, the door. I stood there a long time after he left. I didn't know why exactly, but something in his voice stuck with me. The way he said he had something to talk about. It wasn't casual. It felt important. I looked back at the journal, still lying open on the table. Something wasn't right, and deep down, I think I already knew. Jason came home that Friday, just as he said he would. I heard the door open and found myself walking, faster than I meant to, meeting him in the hallway. I hugged him tighter than usual. He didn't say much at first, just that college was stressful, and he was glad to be home. But there was something in the way he looked at me, like he'd been carrying something heavy for a while. "Is Dad not home yet?" he asked, glancing around the living room. "No. He said he'd be late again tonight." Jason nodded slowly, then sat down on the couch. He looked hesitant, like he wasn't sure where to start. I sat beside him, trying to give him space. "There's something I want to talk to you about," he finally said. "Just the two of us." My heart skipped. I told him I was listening. He paused, eyes focused on the floor. "Don't you think Dad's been acting strange lately?" I didn't answer right away. I didn't need to. He could see it in my face. "Every time I come home," he went on, "it's like he's avoiding me, and when I overhear him on the phone, something just feels off." I nodded slowly. "You're not the only one who's noticed." Before he could say anything else, we heard the familiar sound of the garage door opening. Frank was home. Jason stiffened instantly and whispered, "Let's talk later." Frank stepped inside, briefcase in hand, and stopped when he saw Jason. "Didn't know you were coming home," he said, trying to sound casual. "Could have picked you up from the airport." "I took the bus," Jason replied quickly. Last minute decision. Dinner that night was strange. Frank talked about work, about the company's latest project. Jason said very little, and I just sat there, pretending to listen, but watching the two of them carefully. There was a wall between them, silent but heavy. It hadn't always been that way, but it was now. Later that night, Frank came into the bedroom. I was reading, or at least pretending to. He sat on the bed and said, "I need your help tomorrow. I want to go through your mom's papers again, just some verification for the bank." I asked, "Is there a problem?" "No," he said too quickly. "Just routine." His eyes didn't meet mine. I waited until he turned off the light, then just lay there, staring at the ceiling. I couldn't sleep. My thoughts kept circling the same place. The journal. My mom's warning. Jason's eyes earlier that night. After a while, I slipped out of bed. The house was still. I walked quietly down the hall and stopped at Frank's study. The door was ajar. That alone was unusual. Frank always kept it closed. I pushed it open and stepped inside. Moonlight spilled across the desk. Papers were spread, out, carelessly, as if he'd left in a hurry. And there, right on top, was a folder labeled Martha Wilson Estate, Related. My hands shook as I opened it. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Bank transfers, legal forms. Then words began to stand out. Offshore account, Cayman Islands, wire transfer. Numbers that didn't make sense. Amounts that didn't add up. I flipped through the pages faster, my stomach turning with every one. What was he doing with my mother's money? And then I heard his voice. Low, sharp. "What are you doing?" I turned around. Frank was standing in the doorway. The shadows on his face made him look like someone I didn't recognize. I just wanted to know what was going on with Mom's estate, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Why are there offshore accounts? What is all this? He crossed the room quickly and snatched the folder from my hands. Don't stick your nose in things you don't understand, he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it was cold, controlled. Have a right to know, I said, but my voice was barely more than a whisper. No, he replied. You don't. I'm handling it. Everything is under control. He stepped back, pulled the door shut behind me, and turned the lock. Go to bed, Olivia. I hope you'll have forgotten this by morning. I stood there, in the hallway, staring at the locked door. My hand still trembling. My breath shallow. That night, I lay in bed wide awake, listening to the silence, trying to make sense of what just happened. Frank had never spoken to me like that, never looked at me like that, and for the first time in 35 years, I was afraid of my husband. The next morning, I barely touched my coffee. My hands were still a little unsteady from the night before. Frank had already left when I woke up, just a note on the pillow saying he was sorry for how he spoke and that he didn't mean to upset me. He ended it with, "Let's spend the weekend, as a family." But I didn't feel like a family anymore. I felt like I was living with a stranger. When I walked into the kitchen, Jason was already there brewing coffee. He looked up at me, concern written all over his face. "Are you okay, Mom?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to smile and pretend nothing had happened. But instead, I sat down and said, "Jason, was what you wanted to talk about yesterday related to your father?" He hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, I've been thinking about it for a while now, especially since Grandma passed. Something's off, Mom. The way Dad handled everything after she died. It didn't feel right." I didn't say anything. I just let him talk. I'm studying finance, right? So I've started noticing things. The paperwork, the timelines, the way he deflects when I ask questions. I'm not saying I have the whole picture yet, but something doesn't add up. I looked at my son, at this young man who had grown up so fast. He was trying so hard to protect me, and I could see how heavy that weight was for him. "I found something too," I said quietly. "Documents, offshore accounts. It's not just Grandma's estate. It's more than that. I don't even know how deep it goes." Jason's face changed, like he'd been hoping he was wrong, but now the truth was setting in. "We have to be careful," he said. "I don't think Dad wants you finding out the truth. I don't even know if we're safe with all this. What if he tries to move more money? What if he's hiding more?" I wanted to tell him he was overthinking, that his father might be secretive, but not dangerous. But I couldn't. Not after the way Frank looked at me last night. Not after the coldness in his voice when he told me to forget what I'd seen. Every time Jason and I tried to talk more, Frank seemed to show up. In the hallway, at the kitchen door, walking in from the garage with some casual comment. Always right there, just when the conversation was about to get serious, and always watching, listening, smiling like nothing was wrong. One night, I was sorting some bills at the dining table. Jason walked in and sat across from me. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he leaned in slightly and whispered, "We need to protect what's left. Especially Grandma's estate. I don't trust him." My chest tightened. I didn't want to believe this about Frank. But Jason's eyes were steady, his voice calm. He wasn't panicked. He was certain. That night, after everyone was asleep, I sat in bed and opened my mother's journal again. I read her last entry over and over. I've harbored doubts about Frank for a long time. I wondered what she saw, what she heard, what made her doubt him in the first place, and why I never noticed it. Or maybe I did. Maybe I just didn't want to see it. Maybe I wanted so badly to believe in the life I'd built that I ignored all the quiet signs along the way. Jason's words echoed in my mind, that he was worried for my safety, that we needed to be careful. And all I could think was, how did we get here? How did the man I trusted with everything become someone I needed to fear? I didn't know the full truth yet, but deep down, I knew we were standing on the edge of something much bigger than either of us expected. And once it broke open, there'd be no way to go back. It was a quiet night, one of those evenings where everything feels still, almost too still. Jason had called earlier to say his class was running late, but he'd be home soon. I was curled up on the couch, an old movie playing softly on the TV, but I wasn't really watching it. My mind kept drifting, back to Frank's cold tone, back to Jason's worried voice, and to the memory of my mother's warning. I kept glancing at the clock. It was almost 10. Jason should have been back by now. I told myself not to worry, but that tight feeling in my chest wouldn't go away. Then, the doorbell rang. I jumped to my feet, heart suddenly pounding. Jason would have used his key. Something felt wrong. I peeked through the front window, and my stomach dropped. A police car was parked outside. I opened the door slowly, and 2 officers stood there, both in uniform. Their faces were serious, but not unkind. "Mrs. Branson," the older one asked. "Yes. Is something wrong?" My voice barely came out. "We'd like to speak with you if we may," he said gently. "May we come in?" I nodded and stepped aside, not trusting myself to speak again. My legs felt weak as I led them to the living room. They asked me to sit down. I could feel my hands trembling in my lap. "Mrs. Branson," the female officer began, "we're here to arrest your husband, Frank Branson." I froze. "What? Why? What are you talking about?" The room seemed to tilt for a second. "It's in relation to an ongoing investigation involving financial misconduct, fraud, embezzlement." My voice shook. There must be some mistake. Who filed the report?" The male officer looked at me, gently but directly. "It came from your son." And then I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around and saw Jason standing at the bottom of the stairs, his face pale, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He must have come in quietly while I was distracted. "Jason?" I barely recognized my own voice. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said, stepping closer. "I didn't know how to tell you. But I couldn't keep it in any longer." The officers gave us space, stepping back as if to let the moment play out. I stared at him, still trying to understand. You reported your father?" He nodded. "I've been looking into everything. The company finances, Grandma's inheritance, the offshore transfers. It's all real. I wanted to tell you earlier, but I didn't want to scare you until I had proof. I felt like I couldn't breathe." Just then, we heard another car pull into the driveway, tires on gravel, a car door shutting. Frank was home. Jason's eyes widened. He wasn't supposed to be back until tomorrow. The front door opened, and Frank stepped inside. He stopped cold when he saw the officer standing there. Then his eyes shifted to me, then to Jason. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded. The officer stepped forward. "Mr. Branson, you are under arrest for suspicion of fraud and embezzlement." Frank looked stunned for only a second. Then his expression twisted into something harder. He turned toward Jason. "You?" His voice was sharp, full of disbelief and fury. "You did this?" Jason didn't flinch. "I did, because you left me no choice." "You've ruined everything," Frank snapped. "You've betrayed this family." Jason stood tall, even though his voice shook. "No, you betrayed us first." The female officer began reading Frank his rights. He didn't resist. He just kept looking at me, like he was waiting for me to say something. But I had nothing left to give him. I couldn't even move. As they handcuffed him and led him out the door, he turned back one last time. "Don't believe him," he said, desperation creeping into his voice. "He doesn't know what he's talking about." But I didn't answer. Dishan, door closed behind them, and the police car drove off into the night. And I just sat there. My legs gave out beneath me and I sank onto the couch, staring at the spot where Frank had stood. My whole body felt cold. Jason sat beside me, silently. He didn't try to explain. He didn't try to defend himself, because there was nothing left to say. Everything I thought I knew, about my husband, about my family, about my life, had just fallen apart. And in the silence of that living room, all I could feel was the weight of the truth crashing down around us. A week later, Jason and I sat in the waiting room of a law office downtown. Neither of us had said much on the drive over. He kept looking at me like he wanted to ask if I was okay, and I kept pretending I was, but inside, I was still trying to understand how everything had unraveled so quickly. The lawyer's name was Sarah Kaplan. She greeted us kindly and invited us to sit across from her. She didn't waste time. She had already reviewed the documents Jason had helped gather and what the investigators had found after Frank's arrest. "Mrs. Branson," she began, "I won't lie to you. This isn't just a case of poor judgment. What your husband did was deliberate, long-term, and well-covered. The embezzlement from Santa Fe Construction alone totals around $650,000. I felt my breath catch, but she wasn't done. And from your mother's estate, documents show he forged legal filings and transferred approximately $450,000 into personal offshore accounts." Jason's hand tightened around mine. Sarah continued, "All told, we're looking at over $1.1 million in fraud." I couldn't say anything. I just stared at the papers spread out across her desk. That kind of money, it was unimaginable to me. I had worked at the same small accounting office for 30 years, living modestly, saving carefully. I never even dreamed of seeing numbers like that in my own life. Jason leaned forward. "What does this mean for my mom?" Sarah paused, her expression softening. "Because much of the fraud happened during the marriage. Any shared assets you held with Frank are now subject to seizure. The house, your retirement accounts, your savings, they're all on the table for restitution." I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. Everything I'd worked for, gone. Because of choices I never made. Because of trust I placed in the wrong person. I turned to Jason, trying to keep my voice steady. "We'll figure it out. But..." He shook his head. "I'm taking a break from school. I'll get a job, help cover what we need." "No," I said firmly. "Absolutely not." "Mom, you are finishing what you started. Your education matters. You're building a future. I won't let this mess take that away from you too." He didn't argue after that, but I could see he wanted to. Sarah laid out some options. Divorce, civil separation of assets, legal action to try and recover my rightful share of the estate. It would be slow, complicated, and exhausting. But it was something. That night, after we got home, I sat at the kitchen table long after Jason had gone to bed. The silence felt heavier than usual. The house was still ours for now, but it already felt like it didn't belong to me anymore. I looked around at the photos on the wall, the little souvenirs from vacations past, and the worn edges of the rug we'd picked out together one summer, and it hit me all at once. How much time I'd spent building this life. 35 years with Frank. 35 years believing I was safe, believing I knew who he was, that we were a team. I thought about the nights we laughed in this very room, the dinners, the quiet mornings, the promises. And then I thought about that locked door, his cold voice, the way he took everything without blinking. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the betrayal, the lies, the fact that he could look me in the eye all these years and keep something so dark hidden underneath. I didn't just lose a husband. I lost the life I thought I had. And as much as it hurt, I knew I had to start over. I called Sarah the next morning and told her I wanted to proceed with the divorce. I didn't know what the future would look like. I didn't know how hard the road ahead would be. But I knew I couldn't keep living in the shadow of someone else's lies. It was time to fight for what little I had left, and for the chance to rebuild, even if I had to do it from the ground up. The house sold faster than I thought it would. I stood outside the front door on the last day, keys in hand, and just stared at it. 35 years of birthdays, holidays, late-night talks, slammed doors, quiet dinners. So much life had happened in that house. But now, it belonged to someone else. Jason and I moved into a small apartment downtown. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, no garden, no front porch. Just a narrow view of the sidewalk and the hum of passing cars. At first, it felt like a loss I couldn't put into words. But slowly, the quiet started to feel comforting instead of sad. The space was small, but it was ours, and it was honest. Jason went back to school. He picked up a part-time job at a cafe near campus and insisted on helping with expenses. I told him his education came first, and he nodded, even though I knew he'd still find ways to chip in. As for me, I was lucky. Jim Pendergast, my longtime boss, pulled me aside one day after everything came out. "You've always worked with integrity, Olivia," he said. "This situation, it wasn't your doing. We'd be lucky to have you stay." That moment nearly broke me. I didn't cry, but I came close. For someone to still see value in me after all of this, it meant more than I could say. I kept my job. My title changed a bit, and my responsibilities shifted. But I still walked through those office doors every morning with a sense of purpose. It was one of the only pieces of my old life I didn't have to let go of. Frank was sentenced to 7 years in prison. Embezzlement, fraud, falsifying documents. The judge called it premeditated, calculated. I went to visit him once a month, more out of closure than obligation. He looked smaller behind the glass, tired, older than I remembered. He apologized each time. "I never meant to hurt you," he said once. "I thought I was protecting us." I listened. I nodded. But I didn't offer forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Some wounds go too deep for words to reach. Then, just when I thought the last of the surprises had come and gone, I got a letter in the mail. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize. I opened it without thinking, and stood frozen in the hallway as I read the contents. My mother, Martha, had created a trust fund. Years ago, without telling anyone. It was modest by some standards, but more than enough to give Jason and me breathing room again. She'd set it up in secret, protected it from Frank, and marked it explicitly for us. For me and my son. I sat down on the edge of the couch and held the letter in my lap for a long time. I don't know if she always suspected what Frank might do, or if it was just her way of ensuring I had something of my own. But in that moment, I felt her with me. Maybe she knew, even then. Maybe that was her final gift. Jason came home later that evening, exhausted from classes and his shift at work. I showed him the letter and he just stared at me in disbelief. "What do we do now?" he asked. I smiled. "We live. We take it slow. We use this wisely. For your future. For stability. We don't go backward." He nodded, quiet for a moment, then asked, "What about Dad?" I looked at him and said, "He made his choices. Now it's time for us to make ours." And just like that, something shifted. We weren't a broken family anymore. We were a new one. Smaller, yes, but stronger somehow. Built on honesty, on second chances, on love that had been tested and proven real. A new kind of family. And maybe, just maybe, a new kind of peace. It was Christmas Eve, and everything felt quiet in the best way. No noise, no chaos, no expectations. Just the soft hum of the heater in our little apartment and the smell of something warm in the oven. Jason had helped me set the table. Nothing fancy, just a small roast, a few vegetables, and a store-bought pie we both liked. In the corner, we had a tiny tree with a few lights flickering gently. That was enough. It was more than enough. Jason poured 2 glasses of sparkling cider and handed me one with a little grin. "To surviving the year," he said. "To starting over," I added. We clinked glasses, and for a moment, I just watched him. This young man who had grown so much in just a few months, who had stood up for the truth even when it broke his heart, who never once turned away from me. As we sat down to eat, we talked about the trust fund. Not about using it for vacations or big purchases or anything flashy. That was never who we were anyway. "I was thinking," Jason said between bites, "we could use some of it for tuition, and maybe set aside a portion for emergencies, just so we're never in that position again." I nodded. That's exactly what I had in mind. It's not meant to fix everything, but it gives us a little peace, a little room to breathe. He looked down at his plate, then back at me. "What about Dad?" There was a pause. Not heavy, just thoughtful. I set my fork down. "He chose his path," I said gently. "Now we choose ours." Jason didn't say anything, but I saw the relief in his eyes, like he needed permission to move forward, and I had just handed it to him. After dinner, we moved to the couch, wrapped ourselves in blankets and watched the snow begin to fall outside the window. It was soft and slow, the kind of snowfall that doesn't make a sound, but makes you feel like the world's been wiped clean for a moment. And sitting there next to him, I finally let myself breathe. I thought about everything we'd lost, but more than that, I thought about what we still had. Honesty, trust, resilience. The kind of love that isn't afraid to look truth in the eye and still choose to stand together. That, to me, is what family really means. If you've ever had to rebuild after betrayal, if you've ever had to find your footing again after the ground disappeared beneath you, I hope you know you're not alone. Share your story below. We heal when we speak. And if this story touched you, maybe hit subscribe. We've still got more life to live, and I'd love to share it with you.